and some of you from farther. And I was supposed to be here in January. You had a little problem in January, so I did not come. But thank you. I hope that our conversation tonight can bring a little happiness and encourage you to find new ways to be here too.
Thank you. And obviously all of us here want to learn how to be happy. And I have to tell you, this book really can make a difference. It's pretty amazing that way. And my first question, though, after hearing all these wonderful things about you is, after building magazines like Parade and TV Guide into powerhouses, 17 books, which is 10 more than me.
But we're not counting.
No, but including, she wrote a novel that I read 20 years ago, or 25 maybe, called Minor Spectacular, which is near and dear to my heart. And now you're focusing on social science, from Gratitude Diaries, which I also read, and everyone I know makes the gratitude list, so it's a very important book, to this one, to happiness. What made you make the shift?
Well, so I have had a wide-ranging interests, and lately I am interested in inspiring people. And after I wrote the Gratitude Diaries started out as a little bit of a literary device. I was going to spend a year living more gratefully and see what happened. And what happened is that it worked, and that I actually found myself incredibly happy that year. And I discovered that you really can change your perspective. You can think of things from a different way. It's the old saying that you can't control the events in your life, but you can control how you think of them, and you can reframe things. So cut to what inspired me to write this book. I was on a vacation, and I know it's hard to get sympathy when you tell a story about being on vacation, but it was one of those days where everything that goes wrong, when the flights are late and they lost my luggage and all of this, and we're at a little airport in the Caribbean, and I'm with my husband, and I'm doing all of my little gratitude things that I know how to do, the reframing, the look for the positivity. I'm standing there and I'm going, my luggage is lost, but I am so grateful that I have a swimsuit in my carry-on, and all these other things. And we finally get out of the airport, and we're on a boat going to our final destination. And all of a sudden, the sun is shining, the water is sparkling, and all of a sudden I felt happy. And I didn't have to do any of my gratitude tricks. And I thought, what just happened? And we've all been in that situation, right? We've all been climbing a mountain, walking on one of the beautiful beaches here. You should all be happy all the time. It's gorgeous here. And you suddenly feel some joy. And that got me to realizing that at that moment, my body was sending a message to my mind rather than vice versa. And I started being interested in body-mind connections.
I'm glad you said the vice versa, because I think that's not in our questions, but I kept thinking, yeah, that's opposite of what we think. And it is a fascinating idea that our bodies contribute to our emotions. And in fact, sometimes more than our brains. And I think I'm going to quote on your book, somebody said, the body reacts and then the brain interprets. Can you give us an overview of what that means?
Sure. So we think of our brain as being the big computer that controls everything, right? You're all very smart, you have big brains, and you figure you're in control, that your brain is controlling things. Well, it turns out your brain is a 3-pound blob sitting in a very dark skull. And the only information it gets is what you're sending it from your senses, from your environment, from the things you touch, see, smell, taste. And then your brain is interpreting it. So this goes way back 100 or more years to William James, the great philosopher and psychologist, who came up with the question of, if you're walking through the forest and you come across a bear, okay, I live in New York, so let me update that. You're walking down a dark street and you come across an alley and you suddenly get scared and your heart starts pounding. So does your heart start pounding because you're scared, or are you scared because your heart starts pounding? Well, we're all brain-centric people, and you're going like, that's easy. I got scared. My heart started pounding. And the research all now seems to suggest that it's the opposite, that your body responds first. And your brain is then scanning and going, heart beating, palms sweaty. Ooh, I bet we're scared. Now, it sounds a little crazy to say this, but if you think of it in more general terms, like you wouldn't be surprised when you touch a stove that you pull your hand back long before you think of it. Or if you're crossing the street and a Porsche's coming down, you jump out of the way long before you think, oh my goodness, that car is bearing down on me. I do think I should get to the sidewalk. If we had to figure out everything, we couldn't live. How is your brain going to tell you to blink 9,000 times a day? And what happens when you're asleep? So we understand it on that very basic level. But that's when I started realizing that and started understanding how the body is sending these important signals. I realized that it's sending us signals that are telling us to be scared. And maybe it can also send us signals to tell us to be happy.
So you're talking a little bit about survival instinct and biological reactions to things in our environment, but there's also some very surprising things in your book. Tell us about the hot coffee effect.
So this was a study out of Yale. That was one of the first studies that got me interested in this subject. And I give the details, and in the interest of time, I won't give the specific details, but the finding from a professor named John Barge there was that when people are given a hot cup of coffee to hold, and other people are given an iced coffee to hold, and then they're asked to evaluate certain people that they meet, the people who are holding the hot coffee judge them as being kinder and warmer than the people who are holding the iced coffee. Our bodies seem to think in metaphors. If you're holding something warm, you feel warm. All of a sudden, kind of feeling warm towards you. And your brain is not completely sure why that's happening. Other research has been very similar. There's a professor at the University of Michigan who found that if you're sitting on a hard chair, and may I say, this is a really hard chair. If you're sitting on a hard chair, you tend to negotiate harder than if you're sitting on a soft chair. He's a business professor. He was looking at how people negotiate car prices. And it may be that when you're on the hard chair, you're feeling a little edgy, your body is getting a message of edginess, and it's sending that message up. You wouldn't believe this. You wouldn't think it's happening. One other example was that people were given resumes. Now, that's a kind of standard psychological test. And if I gave you a resume and asked you to evaluate it, you'd go, aha, she's checking for unconscious bias. And I'm not going to get tricked by the person's name or where they live or their gender. But what you wouldn't think of is the weight of the clipboard. And it turns out that the people who had a heavy clipboard were judged as being more serious and heavyweights in a way that the people who had whose resumes were on the light clipboards weren't. So once again, if I asked you, are you judged by are you judging with a clipboard? You say, of course not. But it's these unconscious messages that our bodies are constantly sending, and our brains are interpretation machines. They're trying to figure stuff out. Do I like this person? How much do I offer in this negotiation? And they're dependent on all sorts of things coming from our bodies as well as our minds.
Okay. Well, I have to say, last night, thanks to you, I got in bed and I could feel my soft blanket and my warm sheets and even the scent of my lavender lotion on my hands really added to my sense of comfort. So I thought it's also the senses that contribute to that, right? Can you explain that?
It is absolutely. And I talk about some of that in the book. Lavender and things that you smell, things that you touch, where you put your body is important. You were putting it in comfy sheets.
Yeah.
Being outside turns out to be one of the most important things we can do for our happiness. There was a study out of the UK, which is the worst named study ever. It's called the Mappiness Project, which is a combination of map and happiness. And they were tracking where people were they, outside, and they were being on a GPS tracker, and then they would bing them at various times during the day to find out how happy they were, what their emotions were. And they found that the number one connection they could make was that being outdoors makes you happier.
Okay, well, right now we're indoors. So if you could give us some suggestions right now that could add to our happiness from our bodies, what would you suggest?
Okay, everybody, please sit up a little bit straighter. I should have done this at the beginning because there's research that shows that when you sit up straighter, you have better access to positive emotions. You're going to like me better now that you're sitting up straight. And give a little smile, even a fake one.
Okay, well, what about when men tell you to smile?
It's a great question, and I talk about it in the book because as feminist women, we're going like, we've spent much too much time being told to smile. And from that perspective, you don't want to do it. But from the perspective of being happier, there was great research that was done many years ago where people were asked to put a pen in their mouths. And some of them in such a way that the pen forced their face into a smile, some that the pen forced their face into a frown. The people whose faces were forced into a smile reported being happier and found cartoons funnier. MG is a fabulous cartoonist. Found cartoons funnier. You should have people smile before they read your cartoons than the people who were frowning. And there's something called the facial feedback hypothesis, which says that your brain is constantly scanning your facial muscles. And the shape that your face is in is determining in part how you feel. Now, by the way, some additional recent research has found that people who have Botox and are unable to frown, actually, it may be a way of helping with depression and negative feelings. So you now have a psychological reason to get Botox that has nothing to do with vanity.
All right, thank you. All right, so we're outside, and many of us who live in Los Angeles and move to Los Angeles make a conscious attempt to live as close to the water as possible. And especially after being displaced from the fire, I love being, well, I definitely came here for the ocean anyway, thank you. Yeah. But now I live really close to the water, and every morning I take a walk, and there is something really calming about just seeing the water. Yes. Why is that?
What you're saying is absolutely correct. And the why is not completely known, but the research is really strong that being near water makes you calmer and happier. It's one of the number one things. I mentioned being outdoors before, and being outdoors near water is a multiplying effect. And there was one study that found that 2 hours a week near water can dramatically improve your well-being. And it doesn't have to be 2 hours at once. You know, you can take, and it doesn't have to be the ocean, though. You guys are lucky enough to live near the ocean, but, you know, a pond, a stream, a lake, something about water. Maybe it's the way it changes. Maybe it's the way the light reflects on it. Maybe it's something that it does to our cortisol, to the other hormones. It's really powerful.
All right, let's shift from calm to anger. Now, a lot of us are told, or we have been told, that we should express our anger in physical ways, or else it will fester and really burst. And my first husband had some anger issues, and my second husband is very calm.
Which is why he was your first husband.
Yes. I would suspect. But I bought him a punching bag, so when he came home from work, he could get it out on the bag. And I even encouraged one of my daughters to take kickboxing lessons to get her anger out. I don't know that either of those things worked, but I'm really interested to know what you think about whether they worked and what you might suggest instead.
Well, the research is that they do the opposite of what you think.
So why did people tell us that?
If you think about it, if you want to be calm, you want to be calm.
Yeah.
If you start punching things and getting worked up, your body is worked up, your mind is getting worked up, you're going to get more and more angry and more worked up. So why do they tell us that? Why do they tell us that? Possibly goes back to the person who got so many things wrong, including that which, of course, was Freud.
Yeah, that's in my book too.
Who pretty much described people as being like teapots. You know, so that if you turn on the teapot and you don't let the steam out, it explodes. Well, here's a message for you. People are not teapots. And that's not how it works. It's actually the opposite for us. So if you get yourself physically worked up, you're going to get more and more emotionally worked up. The best thing to do, when I was talking to the researcher, whose name is Brad Bushman, who had done a huge amount of research on this, and you can read about some of his fascinating studies on having people punch things versus not. And so having grown up in Boston, a good Bostonian, I said, so the best thing to do would be to just repress your feelings, right? And he said, no. He said, the best thing to do, if you want to go back to the teapot analogy, is to turn down the temperature. So what you just want to do is try to do the things that will turn down the temperature. So you want to do the opposite of punching. You want to knit. You want to do woodworking. You want to
go to the water.
You want to garden. You want to take a walk by the water. You want to stroke a dog. You want to do anything that lowers your, or a cat, for the cat people, that lowers your anxiety.
Okay. Now, food is also a very big topic in your book. And as we know, food is problematic because it's necessary. But you suggest that we eat with all the senses. And in fact, good news for everyone here and John Kelly, Chocolate Next Door, you also recommend that having a little bit of chocolate at the end of the day can really end your day well. And I'm all for that, but I would like to know the science reason.
Well, I'll get to that in a minute, but the idea of eating with all of your senses, and I did stop at John Kelly and have some chocolate before I came in. The idea of eating with all your senses, I have a chapter in the book called Why Wine Tastes Better in Paris. And have you ever been on a vacation and you've had the most fabulous bottle of wine? You're in Paris, you're in the south of France, or you've had the most wonderful macaron, at Pierre Hermé in Paris, or wherever you're going. And then you come home, and I did this to my poor husband. I don't drink very much, but we'd had the most amazing bottle of wine in Paris. And I sent him out, you've got to find it when we got back. And he found the wine store in New York that ordered it for him and gave it to him. And then the guy handed it to him and he said, got you what you wanted, but I got to tell you, it's not going to taste like it did in Paris. And of course, he was right, because in Paris, I wasn't drinking the wine. I was drinking in the atmosphere. I was drinking in being in a romantic city with my husband. I was drinking and being in this beautiful cafe. And it happens with everything, that we are eating what things look like. There's a study in the book. There's a wonderful professor out of the UK named Charles Spence, who's at Oxford, who has done many of these multi-sensory experiments. And he had a famous chef prepare a salad in the shape of a Kandinsky painting. And people found it 27% tastier than when he had them eat it as just a salad. They found that dessert tastes sweeter when it's on a white plate than when it's on a black plate. If you're having a party and you want to impress people with your cheese, you can take them to the fancy Brentwood place that Robert brought me to this afternoon and buy that really expensive cheese. Or you can just buy an angular plate, because apparently cheese tastes sharper and people like it better when it's on an angular plate. So there's all sorts of fascinating research like that, but that basically the idea is that we think we're tasting something, but we're bringing in so many other things. The idea of chocolate, just quickly, was I was looking for a reason why everybody should eat chocolate. No. This was suggested to me by somebody who pointed out that one of our problems with eating is that it goes back to our evolutionary biology, where, we needed to eat and we needed to get enough calories. And so we always were trying to consume at the moment what was available. For our current circumstances, that's not necessary, but it sometimes helps to know that you still have something. So when you're sitting at your restaurant or you're sitting at your dinner table and you don't want to eat everything, but you think well, it's in front of me right now. If you know, as I always know, that you have a little chocolate in your desk drawer that later tonight you can have, it does something to that evolutionary sense of eat while it's available. It says there is still going to be something else, something that you want that's available.
I actually do that for sure. One chocolate at the end of the day. But it also is hard because...
yes, I guess for you, I can see. But
no. But I grew up, having to join the Clean Plate Club. So always fighting that, and knowing there's chocolate helps a little bit. But you do say something in the book about cupcakes, which is always a really great treat at my house. What is it that children know about cupcakes that adults can learn from?
Well, if any of you have kids or grandkids and have ever been to a party and the kids are dying for the cupcakes and they're so excited, and then they sit down and they take 2 bites of the cupcake and then they run up and are off. Because it turns out that our greatest pleasure in food is in the first bites. And the pleasure we take goes down. And one of the people I spoke to who had done the research on this described it as if you're eating a bowl of chocolate mousse. And you have the first taste, and it's a 10. It's great. You love it. Your body's excited. Your brain is excited. We get used to stuff real fast. So the second taste, maybe a 9, 8, 7, 6. By the time you're at the bottom of the bowl, you're not paying so much attention. The chocolate mousse isn't that exciting anymore. And maybe you're now at a 2. And his point was that our pleasure in something is not the sum of all those bites, but the average of it. So if you stop earlier, if you stop after you've had 4 bites, you have that great pleasure of it without then the regret that you have when you've eaten the whole thing. And I've actually found that to be really interesting. I will say that Robert complained about this and did text me when he was reading my book that he had a box of cookies and really the last one tasted just as good as the first one, but that he intended to continue this research and continue this experiment. And for several days he was going, yep, turned out to be the same with the cake. Last taste was as good as the first one. So I can't vouch for it, but the research does suggest that.
All right, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about creativity. There's a lot of writers probably in here, and especially readers, who appreciate creativity. And in your book, you talk about how movement really inspires that.
Right.
I'd like to know what kind of movement helps that. And it's just strange that it works that way. We do hear a lot of writers run or think about it. And I have to say, since reading that chapter, I don't listen to as many podcasts in the morning when I'm walking. So I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to get more creative if I just let my brain think. Well,
Right.
What is it that makes that work?
Well, there are a couple of things. And one is there is great finding that movement, walking, releases creativity. People become more creative. And there was research out of Stanford that I detail in the book about how walking makes you more creative. There's something about the fluidity of motion that seems to release the fluidity of your brain. And it can work with any kind of movement also, if you're a biker or a runner. But it also seems that the idea of taking the walk that you were suggesting and not listening to the podcast, there's something called soft fascination. Psychologists refer to it as soft fascination, which is when you're getting stimulation. So whether it's from walking, whether it's being on the beach, there's some kind of stimulation, but it's not so overwhelming that you're focused on it. And that seems to be something that releases creativity. So if you're taking a walk, if you're on the beach, if you have something that's stimulating your mind, it will encourage creativity. If it's too overwhelming, you're going to focus on that. But the movement itself is also very powerful.
Great excuse not to run really fast. Just walk.
One of the people who did the research said that she knows that for some people, running is a creative outlet, that for her, if she were running, the only thing she could think about was when she could stop running.
Right. So, which leads us right into the next question, pain. You talk in the book that we think about pain in ways that isn't maybe all there. You have a different way of defining pain. And also I found it really interesting to note that once I thought about it, that we feel pain more at night. So I want to know how it is that you feel differently about pain now that you've done this research, and also how we can use that evidence to help us not feel it so much.
Well, there are 2 chapters in the book on pain, so I'll try to be brief about it. But the basic idea is that there are 2 kinds of pain. There is acute pain. You fall down, you break a leg, something happens.
Right.
And there's chronic pain. And chronic pain is what we're talking about here, which is the pain that you twist your back and you hurt your knee, and it goes on and on and on and on for months afterwards. And I think it's after, I can't recall whether it's 3 or 6 months, that it starts to be considered chronic pain. It turns out that once it's chronic pain, it's a different brain pathway than when it's acute pain. And it seems that what can happen is that the cause of the pain can be over, but the brain is still sending the same message. So your finger healed, your broken ankle healed, but the pain pathway is continuing. And I think of it as, you know, those little electrical circuits that you used to do with your kids for science projects, and they had to make a light up, and they had to do the circuit correctly and the light would light up. That's what a pain circuit is. And that red light is the pain. But the pain is not necessarily coming from the red light.
So
we
how
think
can
of
we
the
stop
pain, we could stop it in the brain. And we can stop it. There's a lot of research on chronic pain and actually with behavioral therapy, with helping people think about their pain in a different way. The head of the pain clinic at Stanford told me that sometimes when you get people to understand, to think of their pain as like, wow, my brain is just tricking me. It's not my back anymore. My brain is tricking me. Then it's not as scary. And they're able to do other things And so it's a complicated process, but it was very exciting for me to start thinking about pain in a different way. And I hope people who read the book will get that same approach.
Well, when you think about pain in a different way, one thing that was really fascinating and probably one of the controversial things in your book is that you say that sometimes a placebo can have a similar or almost the same effect as an antidepressant. How do you explain that?
Well,
an antidepressant.
Actually, it's not that controversial. The findings are that the placebo effect is really, really powerful. And when drugs have to be approved, they have to do better than the placebo effect. And that's really hard to do. And that's why so many drugs don't get approved. And drugs that do get approved are often just a tiny bit better than the placebo effect. So in antidepressants, the findings, and pretty much even everybody pretty much agrees, and I don't remember the number, but I believe it's that about 82% of an antidepressant is a placebo effect. Now that leaves an 18%, which can be a huge amount and can have a huge effect on people, particularly when we're talking about severe depression. So I'm not in any way suggesting that antidepressants don't work. I'm saying, though, that to be aware that your body is doing a lot of the work itself. And to understand that, and before you're making the decision on what drug you want to take, I don't think there are a lot of doctors who are explaining to people, your body is handling about 82% of this itself, but 18% of it, I think, is going to make a difference for you.
So it brings us back to the circuitry a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get on to something happier.
Yes.
Before I read this book, I stopped sending flowers to my friends or even bringing flowers to people because I thought it was mean to the flowers because I was killing them, and it wasn't nice to my friends because the flowers were just going to die. But after reading your book, I think FTD should sponsor this book tour because your thesis is that flowers are always a good idea. Flowers make people happy, and that there's actually a little bit of a biological reason for that. Can you explain that?
Well, there was research where people were sent flowers, candles, and a fruit basket. And it turned out that the flowers had a longer lasting effect and made people happier. I talked about this at one talk where somebody had just come to my house and given me a candle. And afterwards she came up and said, "I'm so sorry to you about the candle." I said, no, it's okay. I like candles. But it does seem that we are biologically primed to respond to flowers. That it may be that it used to be that when we would see flowers, way back again, evolutionary biology, we knew that fruit was coming and food was coming. So flowers make us happy. And it doesn't have to be something expensive.
Is there something about the color or
go out and pick a wildflower? It's just something about the color. Yes, all of it seems to do it. And I tell the story in the book about, I don't have a great green thumb and I'm not a wonderful gardener, but I do love getting flowers. And my husband used to always bring me flowers. And then one day I picked some in our backyard and I came in and had them in a vase. And I was so happy all day to look at the beautiful flowers I had brought in. And my husband came home and said, "Those are so nice. Those are weeds."
And you're starting to itch.
But the difference between a weed and a flower, not that much. So yes, and flowers can give you joy.
And we can all buy our own flowers. So let's do that.
Or pick them here. You probably all grow them here.
Well, we might get arrested if we pick them in certain places. But okay, on a personal note, I love that you confess that you're a doodler. And I know that I used to doodle. My kids have gotten in trouble at school for doodling. I know for a while there were fidget spinners. What I want to know is, how does doodling help you focus, and how is it a good thing?
One of the worst things we have done to children and to adults is tell them to sit down and be quiet. People need to move, just like when we were talking about with creativity. I'm moving my hands. We think better when we move. And I've always doodled. I'm a terrible drawer, but I love to doodle. And I'm always drawing these geometric forms when I'm on the phone or whatever. And we think of doodling as being something you do when you're bored. It actually turns out to be the opposite. It actually turns out that people can focus better when they're doodling because you're moving. And that movement is letting you focus better. It was a research that was done, I believe, with telephone calls, where some people were doodling during the telephone call, some weren't. And the people who were doodling remembered what was said in the telephone call much better than the other people.
Because there's lots of distractions. It's just
you were talking about the fidgeting,
Right.
you're able to get that out, but still, and then focus on what you need to.
Okay, my last question, since we're in a bookstore, is you say that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, and yet we all do that. But you say that that's not a bad thing. Why?
Well, because once again, we live with our senses, right? And I'll give you an example, not just of a book, but feeling something. I got an iPhone while I was writing this book. I got a new iPhone, and I brought it home, and I just didn't like it. I thought, what's wrong with this iPhone? I liked my old one better. This one is so clumsy. I can't make it work. And I went back to the Genius bar, and fortunately, the genius there was really smart. And he said, I think it's the case you bought. And I said, the case I bought? He said, yeah, I'm finding that people who bought that case, and it was the cheapest one, of course, it was just a hard plastic case. He said, I'm finding that people who bought that case don't like the phone. Would you mind if I just, before I do anything else, would you mind if I just change the case? And he put a soft silicone case on it. And he said, just try this for a couple of days. If it doesn't work, come back. So I went home, and I thought, that's silly, but gosh, these apps are working nicely now. And wow, I didn't realize that the camera is so much better on this phone. And it actually took me a little bit to go like, oh, the phone has not changed. But what happened was the feel in my hand of that clumsiness was just sending a message of discomfort. And I was just uncomfortable with everything about the phone. So the casing on the phone actually changed how I felt about it. And yes, what your cover looks like, what my cover looks like, it's going to inspire people or not. And it's going to make them think about the book in a different way. And there's kind of nothing wrong with that. We see it's like eating. Realize that you're taking in everything from lots of different perspectives.
It needs to look good. All right. Well, I think we should open up the questions now. Does anyone have a question? Wendy?
I have a question. This is great. Thank you. I'm familiar with a lot of the research that you're talking about, but what I haven't seen is there's two things I haven't seen, and I'm wondering if it's in your book. Waking up in the middle of the night, like worrying, or waking up in the morning, like worrying or having anxiety or being kind of sad. I know like there's some religious ideas about what that is, but I'm wondering if there's any research that you've seen, if there's a body thing about, or if you know, this would be outside.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. And certainly the research on dreams and sleep is fairly complicated. But I would imagine that there is probably some body reaction that you're having. You feel different if the room is too hot or the room is too cold, or as you said, your beautiful sheets or your lavender smells. So
they get tangled up.
Right. So I think all of those things do contribute.
Yeah. Yeah. Other questions? Mel?
I was just going to say hi. First of all, hi. That eating outdoors is like having a picnic is kind of, you get the best of both worlds. And I've noticed so many times that I'm much happier when I'm eating outdoors.
Right, yeah.
And so if you have, and that's just why a picnic is idyllic, because you get the benefit of being outdoors, and you've made a lovely plate of food for yourself.
Right. I so agree. That's interesting. I never thought of picnics before, so that's a really interesting comment. But it's absolutely right. There's something about sunshine. There's something about being outdoors. There's also something about just doing something different. Our brains, as I said, brilliant as they are, like to be lazy, and they'd like to keep everything the same. So that way they don't have to pay a lot of attention. So if you're eating in the same place all the time, if you're doing the same thing all the time, you don't notice it. But if you're going outside, which you don't usually do, and you're putting down your picnic table, your picnic blanket or whatever, and you're sitting in the sunshine and the environment is different, you wake up a little bit. Your brain wakes up and your body wakes up. And by the way, that whole idea of doing something new and putting yourself in a new place is really important. And it doesn't have to be, a picnic will do it. And it doesn't have to be as exotic as a wonderful vacation. Drive home today in a different direction than you usually drive. Go to the farmer's market and buy a fruit that you've never bought before. Taste something different. And so I think that whole concept of put yourself in a different place, see your lunch, dinner, whatever it is in a different way is a great idea. Jeannie.
Hi. With all that research playing around in your head, how much does it change your day-to-day experience? How much do you find yourself more aware or reminding yourself or how much has it changed how you live?
Dramatically. The gratitude diaries changed me dramatically, and this did. So I often find, I live in New York. It's miserable. So I'll be walking down the street and just be, annoyed about something, and the bus is, spouting something at me, and somebody's pushed me, and I'm about to trip, it used to be that I would make myself stop and physically think like, all right, come up with something positive. Think about something positive. You are not going to take another step until you think about something positive. And it's amazing how that works. But now that I've written this book, I have another little trick. And I do it first. I make myself stand up straight. And because usually when you're getting upset, you're like this, right? You're hunched over, you're tense, and you're making yourself more and more tense. And I find that when I feel that, when I'm walking down the street, I usually catch sight of myself in a store window, and I go like, "Who is that old bent over woman?" Okay. And then then I try to stand up straighter, and it usually works. Like look up, and just breathe for a moment, and it makes you feel better. So little things like that have made a big difference for me. Yes.
Really nice talk. I think I'm going to take you out to dinner after. Would you tell me what kind of restaurant we should go to, and what should be the features of the restaurant, including noise?
Okay, well, thank you for setting that up. And I'm glad you added the next part because I couldn't remember all the things that I talk about in restaurants, but there is a noise, and it's not as bad in here as I've noticed it is in New York, but noise is a problem, and noise makes us tense, and noise, think of what noise is. It used, I was saying about we like everything to be the same, and we like everything to be, our brains like everything calm. A noise is to announce to your brain, pay attention. Something might be happening. There may be a tiger there. When you're in a noisy place, you are on constant alert. And when you're in a noisy restaurant, you are tense. You're on constant alert. And I find this so often that, we've had a lovely dinner with friends, and we come back and I say, I didn't have a good time tonight. And the people were wonderful. The food was wonderful, but I was working so hard on listening and not being tense by the noise. And it's I do think it's a big problem that we need to be aware of. Yeah.
It is a big problem.
Most restaurants are noisy.
They're getting that way. Yeah. There's a question over there. Yes.
I live just down the alley, so I probably live maybe closer than anyone, but I can't wait to read the book.
Thank you.
It occurs to me that not only could I use it to make myself feel better, but I could use it to make other people feel better, and therefore it could be used as a persuasive tool to set up an environment that asks a question that you're with a child or a parent or a friend. But I wondered if there's any section in the book where you talk about music. What kind of music makes people happy, relaxed, or tense? Or do you have any thoughts on that?
Music does work, and music is a great, I talk about it even as being a distraction from pain. There's a reason your dentist's office plays music. It's because it is a distraction, and the different kind. I've not done research on the different kinds of music, though there has been research done on that, and it would be an interesting topic. But yes, if you're looking to make your environment more comfortable, throw some soft pillows around and make sure you're serving warm cups of coffee. And,
Decaf.
Right. So there are lots of things that you can do to make your environment more comfortable. Pat?
I was just, when you were speaking about food, I was thinking about Los Angeles and New York. COVID was a dreaded time, but what it did do was force us to eat outside in places we'd never eaten outside before.
Mhm.
And I was speaking with someone at a restaurant here in LA, and he said, that even now, people still prefer to eat outside when now we can eat outside,
Mhm.
and now we all prefer it. So I think
Yeah.
your idea of outside eating it's here to stay.
It's an adventure inside.
Right.
Yeah, so, one struggle I think many people may have right now is that we are forced to spend an awful lot of time on computers at work, everywhere. And I wonder if you talk about that at all in this, because I do feel like something happens, you get sucked in, and the next thing you know, you're not taking a walk, you're not going outside,
Absolutely.
you're not doing all those things. And it's really hard to like get yourself to do these things, even though you are totally right. I have a dog, which really helps.
Right.
That's like it's like
Yeah.
gotta go out now. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and I wondered if you came across any research about all that time on the computer and how that's impacting our ability to go do these things that make us happy.
It absolutely is correct. And I think that being aware of these things is helpful because, some of the things here, as you said, some of it before, but when you read it and you face it, you go like, oh yeah, that's right. I should stand up. I should walk around, right? And, even the idea of when you're working on your computer, as I was saying before about when you're anxious walking down the street, if you're a writer, and I would sit at my desk and I would go, I am not leaving until I finish this paragraph, and then you get more and more hunched over it. And you want to do the opposite. You want to go, I'm going to go outside. I'm going to walk. I'm going to do 5 jumping jacks. I'm going to, go put on some lavender lotion. And so I think that there are things that you can try to remind yourself to do.
I have a
That can be
couple
really
tricks.
helpful.
At the computer. I usually work till 6 or 7, but whenever it's 5:17, it's like, oh, it's my birthday, because 5:17 is my birthday, and every day I just notice, oh, it's my birthday, and just that one thought like resets everything. But I also keep a couple of things that I can rub by my computer, little gifts that people have given to me, that memories of places I go. I collect tiny little things, and I put things I love around my workspace so that if I happen to look up, I can enjoy those for a minute and get back to
That's
it.
very nice.
So
That's very nice.
but that was suggested by your book, those little pops of things. And I was
Yeah.
thought, oh, I do that. Yeah. Because, in these times, it's really important to find little things that bring us joy.
Right.
Other questions?
MG?
Yeah, I think I need your book.
It's up for sale and with a free lipstick right at the counter.
Oh yes, there are free lipsticks.
Yes.
I forgot to give you one.
Yes.
Well, I prescriptively, like how many beach walks do I need to take? And how
2
many
hours
cups
a week.
of hot coffee do I need to hold to feel something other than abject despair at the way that my retirement investments have suddenly diminished with circumstances vastly beyond my control.
Yes. Well,
And why can't I hit something?
there are some things that are in your control and some things that aren't in your control. And, when I wrote the gratitude diaries, I always would say, if there's something you can change it. If you want to go out and march for something, if there's something you can make better, absolutely. Gratitude, happiness does not say, oh, just sit back and accept everything. Quite the opposite. Go ahead and do whatever you can. But there are some things you can't change. You may get sick. You may have somebody who you love who gets sick. Some things happen. And you have to get up the next morning. And you have to put one foot in front of the other. And you have to get through the day. And you can choose to do that in a positive way, where you're trying to make yourself and others feel better. Or you can choose to do it in a negative way. And so you can't try to control the things that aren't in your control, but you can try to say, I'm going to face this as positively as I can, because being negative about it is not going to help the situation. People are more functional, more active, more involved when they're feeling positive, when they're feeling hope. So, if you can try to give yourself some bits of that, it does help.
I'm curious about the flip side of your body knowing about happiness. Your body also knows about trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can be in that loop. And, I've read about somatic treatment, et cetera. And I'm wondering, in your research, how did you think about trauma that lives in the body and how to break that circuitry?
Well, somebody else already wrote that book.
Body
The
keeps
body
the
knows
score.
keeps the score, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't go into trauma. I was approaching it from the opposite side, but I did, as we briefly discussed, I did talk about pain and how to break the pain circuits and how to start thinking about pain differently.
Just
So
I-
hopefully that will be
Yeah, I think
helpful
just
too.
starting to think about it from the perspective of it's a mind job as well as the senses, and not just something that exists forever,
Right.
can be helpful.
Yeah.
I don't know if I need to buy your book for my therapist, and here's why. She told me my size mask inner rage and anger, and she told me and exhorted me to start screaming into the pillows. Now this reminds me of Leslie buying the punching bag, and we're supposed to lavender and aromatherapy. So is she telling me you're wrong? According to your book.
I actually talk in the book about a friend of mine who has a therapist doing exactly the same thing. And he talked about, punching his father and how it would, make him cry when he did that. And what I didn't say to him was that, of course, it made you cry because you're living it again. It's not making it better. You're just living it again. So it has been a therapeutic technique that some therapists believed in. Most of the research is opposed to it now, and there are some therapists who still believe in it. I'm not going to say your therapist is wrong, and
Go ahead and buy her the book.
and if it's
And give her a lipstick too.
and if it's effective, if it's effective for you, then people are not all the same. People are not all the same.
Yes.
I've been listening to all this and thinking, it's brought to mind a study that was done at UC Irvine. And they studied the brain when it experienced trauma and when it related trauma. And the exact same parts of the brain lighted up when a person related trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're going back over these things that are painful, you're reliving this pain in the same parts of your brain,
Mm-hmm.
which makes me think also George Washington had rules of etiquette. There were 127 rules, and to become an officer, you had to write them down. And one of them was not to trouble others with your problems. And the wisdom in that is when you do that, you relive your troubles.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe the same thing could be true about reliving happiness. Maybe the reason we love photos is because it reminds us of joyous moments.
And
Maybe we
flowers
can,
are outside.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so maybe we can do the same thing and relive those happy moments with. That's why we like to see friends we've had memories with.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
John,
you talk about a lot of different body techniques that can increase happiness. Is there one technique that trumps everything? Sorry for using that word, but that is more powerful than all the others, and in fact has an effect on all the others.
are you talking about sex? Do you guys want to discuss this
yourselves? Sex is good. I talked about sex in the book. I don't think that there is one thing that is more important than the others. I think just being aware of your body being in different places. I think if anything emerged from the research, it was the being outdoors and the movement and some of that. But I think there are lots of things to consider. We are complex beings.
Yes,
The
no.
process. A little bit about your writing process.
Sure. It sounds like you write all the time. If you write until 7 o'clock at night.
No, that's not all. I also work with other writers,
Oh,
but
okay.
when I am writing, I definitely once you're in that, you
I'm the
can't
same way.
stop and you have to keep
Yeah.
going, and then until the cats are screaming and.
I'm pretty obsessive when I'm working. Says my husband, nodding.
Yeah.
But with this book,
Helps you married to a writer.
But with this book, I actually did the research as I was writing it. So a lot of people will do all the research and then go back and write the book. With both the Gratitude Diaries and this one, I was sort of living it as I was doing it. And I think hopefully part of the fun of my books is that I'm taking you along with me. And so that I'm not just reporting on the research. I'm saying like, wow, I just read this research about the hot coffee effect from John Barge. And then I call Barge and then I report on the conversation that we had together. And, and so you're part of my interview with him. So it's fun. And so it's more fun for me to write it that way. And it also, I think, helps the flow of the book, because then I've just done that. And then I think like, well, where does that lead to? Oh, well, he knows somebody who did that research about, sitting on the chair. So then I call him. And then, and so it just becomes, it becomes hopefully pretty organic and more fun to read that way.
With mine, I did most of the research first, but it's a historical memoir of women's lives. And it goes up through the years. But then when the paperback came out, more had happened. Roe v. Wade got struck down. And I had a lot of new experiences related to that. And so then I kept updating my research and involving what I was living through. So it's a combination of narrative as well as memoir. So I think there's a lot of techniques, and I'm sure she knows what she needed to know. And then you learn that you need to know more as you move on.
Yeah.
So any other questions?
Great.
It's time to sign books. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.